Good evening. Thank you to everyone who is joining us. This is actually the first official episode of WORDPLAY. This show is special to me because it is where I get to interact and invite some of my favorite authors and writers onto the show and hopefully have what you believe will be compelling discussions. So I am excited to be here and so excited that we have my special guest, Cassie Premo Steele. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Shannon. It's exciting.
Thank you. So let me tell you just a little bit about Cassie. Cassie is a lot of things. She's a writing coach. She is an award-nominated poet, a scholar, and author of 13 books. She's a HuffPost blogger and a former columnist for Literary Mama. So she is a well-rounded writer, an author, and so I'm so excited to have her here. There's a lot of people that are tuning in because, for a lot of people, writing is kind of still an enigma, so I want to find out from you, how did you get into it?
Well, I was sort of born writing. Mm-hmm. I wrote my first novel at the age of 5 and illustrated it myself.
Wow.
And I used to number my diaries in case historians lost one. They would know that one had gone missing.
Oh, my goodness.
But then as I grew up, I went off into academia. I got a PhD in comparative literature and women's studies from Emory University in Atlanta. But I continued doing my creative writing along with the academic writing. And after almost 20 years in academia, I opened up my own coaching business, and I work primarily with women, working one-on-one to help them break through the blocks and the fears that keep them back. For me, I think that writing is a form of service, and that has helped me a lot because as we start to finish pieces and put them out into the world, the ego can take over and we can be on that seesaw of acceptance and rejection and really beating ourselves up over our success or our lack of success. And so the more that we move from the mindset of ego to kind of a heart-centered form of service with our writing, I think that the world opens up to what we have to say. So I would consider my success not necessarily my success, but more of a collaborative journey where what I have to say is helpful to people and touches people and inspires people. And I try to stay in that mindset so that it's not really about me, but it's about what the reader can learn and how she can grow from my writing.
Now, I came across your work first on Literary Mama, and I'll have you just explain a little bit more about the site for those viewers that are not familiar with it. But Cassie was so gracious as to give me some information and help me with my application when I was thinking about becoming a columnist and interested in that. So you were, one of the writers that was on the site where I kind of felt like, okay, I get her writing, your writing resonated with me. So tell everyone that is watching kind of more about the site and how you got involved with it.
Well, Literary Mama is a worldwide site. And one of the things that is cool about it is that they publish all kinds of writing, poetry, short stories, essays. They have columns, interviews, book reviews, features on writers. And it's run by moms all over the world who are writers and get no compensation for their work. And, speaking of the mindset of service, do this as a service to mothers who write and mothers who read and like to see a deeper level of discussion and reflection about mothering. My column, which is still on the site, is called Birthing the Mother Writer. And so each month I would write a column on a different theme of mothering and then ask readers to write in with their own writing. And I would choose one of the writer's pieces to publish. But as I published it, I also gave behind the scenes information about how she revised it, what the publishing process was like for her. So it kind of is a class almost, a class on writing poetry, fiction, and nonfiction about mothering, but also a class on how to submit your work and what makes your work rise to the top for an editor, and helpful tips on working with editors. I often say that writing is really only 50% of the work, which is good news. What that means is the other 50% is really learning how to pitch articles to editors, how to work with publishers, how to be really a good colleague and a partner in the publishing process, to realize that what goes out into the world may be very different from what it was when you thought you were done. But when you approach with that collaborative mindset, then it ends up being what the world needs to read. So I try to give a little bit of those behind the scenes lessons in the column.
And all of that is good information to know because, you know, for most people, it's really on the job training. You know, at a certain point, once you get into it and you really don't understand all the little components that go into it, how psychological writing can be sometimes. You know, there's a lot of people, like for me, you know, when I started writing, I'd always heard, you know, expect, you know, a lot of rejection. And I didn't receive a lot of rejection. So I had all these assignments that I didn't know what to do with. Half of them I was not passionate about. And I didn't realize how psychological it could be. And if I just really didn't want to do the work, it wasn't going to get done. And no matter, and the money didn't matter. So, so there's a lot of things that play into it. What made you feel like Literary Mama was a good platform for your work? And did it really, you know, were there particular goals that you were looking for in terms of increase in readership or what specifically?
Well, I started out as someone who just contributed to the site. The founding editor was actually a friend of mine in grad school, and we had parted ways, taking different paths in life. And so to see that she created this amazing website was really an inspiration for me. And so I had some fiction and some poetry published on the site. And then I decided, you know, as a coach, I work with people one-on-one, but wouldn't it be great to bring that to a wider audience so that they could kind of see what it looks like to work with a writing coach behind the scenes? So I loved working for them because they are incredibly organized. Things run on deadline. It goes through several rounds of editing and copy editing, and it's an extremely professional site. So definitely it sounds like it's a good learning ground. And I know that it has a wealth of information on there. I still post, you know, their submissions list for anybody that's looking on places to submit their work, things like that. So it's definitely a great site to check out if you're an inspiring writer, if you're a new writer, if you are a writer that's trying to get into different markets. So definitely check it out. Now, it's so interesting, and one of the reasons why I love why you are on is because, you know, you are in academia, and I want to find out from you. I pulled up an article that came out last week that was really good. It's called Unpoverty, and it was on the Kenyon Review. And it's a writer is basically talking about how I would say she almost makes it seem so difficult to break into writing. And she goes into
to discuss, her essay goes in to discuss, it's really on like classist, and you have to get a certain level of education in order to make certain contacts and go to different writing conferences and get different fellowships. And it's really defeatist. But for those, for someone like me, it's like, no, you really need to, to write and hone your craft and, trying to figure out what type of writer you want to be, who you want to connect with. There's always going to be different avenues that people take to get to where they're trying to go. But for you, as someone that has gone and gotten her education, works in academia, how do you feel like that's informed your writing?
I think it's informed my writing in that I see the hierarchies in society. So what I mean by that is that there's kind of an elitist track for writing. People who get MFAs, get fellowships, break through the big contests, have big name writers who kind of reach out to them and take them under their wing, and even work in academia, either in creative writing programs or in literature programs. But I think in every society, the real revolution happens from the ground up. And what I love is to go to a local reading series here called Mind Gravy, which accepts everyone. And we hear from people of all colors and genders and backgrounds and voices. And it's this groundswell of diversity that really holds the soul music for the society. So from academia, I learned to see how hierarchy shuts doors for certain people. And my desire is to open those doors to people's hearts through my writing, through the Feminar class that I teach, which has the tagline, all the feminisms, all the time. One of my mentors, although I never met her personally, is Audre Lorde. And she talks about how difference is something that is the source for our creative power. And that as long as we see difference as the problem, then we keep those doors shut and we keep the elites kind of having access to certain things. But when we see that who I am is only enriched by the difference of how you are and the perspective that you bring to the world, then our writing is richer. Not only that, but you could look at it just from a marketing standpoint. We have a bigger audience. Why would you want to only speak to people who are like you? So why do you only listen to people who are like you? This is kind of a conundrum. I don't think that there's any such thing as a great writer or a great artist. I think every writer and every artist, I have a mentor who's an artist who has been in the Whitney and, shown his art all over the world. And he agrees with me that every day we get up and we do our art, we do our writing. That's what is the entrance fee to having our dreams come true. So I remember, though, when I was younger, that I would wait for that fellowship or wait for that big break, wait for the publisher. And I went to a conference once, and the speaker who was the keynote speaker, had one thing to say to the artists and writers in the auditorium. He said, "No one is coming." And once we realize no one is coming, then we ask ourselves, what do I really want to do? Do I really want to be a writer? Am I making that a priority? Am I learning ways to do it such that it's healthy and sustainable? You know, not those binge writing sessions of, you know, caffeine and no food.
I still do that.
Because the truth is that writing has a lot in common with the natural process. And there are cycles and seasons to writing. One thing that's interesting is to look back over your last year and ask yourself in each season, what were you doing with your writing? There was probably a season where new things were springing up. There was a season when you were moving through in a very kind of summer-like growth way. There was an autumn process where you put things out into the world, finished, revised. And everyone also has a winter season where we need to rest. We need to refill our wells, dream, nap, make love, you know, just really enjoy life, and knowing that the spring will come again. This is a great time of year, you know, to realize that spring does come again. So when we start to think not in terms of those kind of pushing times when we try to get everything done at once, but in much longer yearly cycles, then we can start to be more gentle with ourselves and really have a sustainable career, not just a quick up and down, but something that will last forever.
Those are wonderful, just wonderful tips overall. I know that, you know, for me, and I believe you perform your poetry live as well, correct? I know for me, you know, coming from the music world, also being a singer, I know that, you know, any type of art has its ebbs and its flows. And for me, starting out as someone that, you know, I always felt like I would be a writer when I grew up, you know, and I'm still waiting to grow up. But I went through all these other career paths to kind of, you know, and then I got into grad school for mental health counseling, and then I became a writer. So that was strange. But, you know, just over the course of the years, just kind of settling down into, okay, this is really something that I might want to do. I started off blogging for divorcemoms.com, just really sharing my story of, you know, what I went through in my marriage, and just trying to see if I was serious about it and if it was something I would do consistently, and then getting the feedback. And knowing, okay, you know, this is something that I might want to turn into a business, you know, so these people come in like me and you get some sort of response. And then I started having my articles syndicated to the Huffington Post, and I'm thinking, well, I should get paid for this. And then you listen to all the little voices around you, and they talk about how much money they're making with content writing on all these things. So I kind of dabbled in several areas, and I started working with a marketing company. And so I'm sitting here and at the lowest point, you know, it's like, okay, I'm making the most amount of money since I started, but I'm writing an article about mining iron ore, doing this research, falling asleep while I'm writing. I don't care anything about this, you know. And so having and just understanding, okay, you know, well, what are my strengths? So what are some things I love to do? And you know, what's always come easily for me is memoir writing, essay writing. And so you still have to go through this process of figuring out who you are as an artist, as a writer, developing your voice, and then figuring out kind of where you fit in. You know, and so a lot of people, you know, it's easy to be overwhelmed by all of this great information that's online about writing. But, you know, when you sit down and you get to talk to people about, you know, their path and kind of how these different opportunities presented themselves, it's funny to get that different view. So I'm wondering with you, because I read this announcement, I think it was by Elizabeth Gilbert, which a lot of people know her from Eat, Pray, Love, probably one of her most popular books that was adapted into a movie. But she, at the end of last year, announced that she was going to go into TV writing. And so, and that's something that I'm starting to develop an interest in. So over the years, how has your writing path changed?
I would say at the heart of everything I do is poetry. I write poetry regularly. It's the way I see the world. It's the way I make sense of the world. It has a healing power for me. My academic book, We Heal from Memory, is about how multicultural American women's literature helps us heal from traumatic histories. So poetry is at the heart of everything I do. But then, as I was talking about those seasons before, I go back and forth between memoir and fiction, depending on what's going on in the world, what's going on in my life, what I want to make sense of. But poetry is at the heart of it because I think there is always a voice that a writer has that is hers, even in fiction when she's writing about very different characters. There's a certain way of looking at the world that stays true in different genres. So I think it's exciting that there are so many genres and that we have that ability to change over the course of our lifetime. But usually writers will have one genre that is their truest voice, the one that is maybe the most raw, the one that is closest to, as Faulkner said, opening up a vein and just bleeding on the page. For me, that's poetry. But the prose allows me to reach a larger audience and to have kind of longer thoughts about things and really develop them in depth.
Now, you have authored 13 books, and I know you talked about really writing your first novel at age 5. Tell us about the journey in these books, having these books published. If you had any that were self-published or if they were all with publishers, tell us more about that.
Sure. A couple of them were self-published. They were for local audiences. One was a year of blogging that I did for a local yoga studio, reflecting on the yoga path. And another was a book of writing lessons that I wanted my students to be able to have. One is an academic book. A couple are actually audio books. 2 are poetry turned into music. And one is the audiobook version of my novel called Shamrock and Lotus. And then I also have 4 poetry books. The first one was published by Finishing Line Press as part of their New Women's Voices competition. And then this is a great story because it has the lesson of thinking outside the box. Most poetry books get published through these competitions because poetry doesn't make very much money. So you send out a manuscript to a few places and you spend $25 each, and they each have different requirements. And so I was going through that process with my second book called This Is How Honey Runs. And these were poems that I wrote for my clients while I was doing the writing coaching. And just before I got it all ready to send out to a few competitions, just before I did that, I decided, I've published a few poems in this literary journal. And I'm wondering if this editor, who I knew had done some poetry collections, some kind of anthologies from the journal, would like to have this as her first single authored volume of poetry. So I sent her an email with like 2 sentences saying, would you like to do this? And she's Irish Italian from New Jersey, so she wrote back right away and said yes. So my next 3 poetry books are with Unbound Content. The publisher is Anne-Marie Lockhart, and she's fabulous to work with. All of the publishers that I've worked with have been really fabulous to work with. I really encourage writers to think about small presses. With Amazon and the way marketing is going with larger presses, you really have to do your own marketing and your own PR anyway. But working with a small press will allow you to develop a relationship with a publisher and really have it be a wonderful experience. My book, Earth Joy Writing, is a book of reflections and lessons on being in balance with nature through journaling. And that was published with Ashland Creek Press, and they're out in Oregon. And again, it's a small publisher that focuses on environmental writing. And that was also a wonderful experience. Just, you know, beautiful people to work with. And I ended up going out to Oregon for a little book tour in the summer. And Oregon's a beautiful state, and I had never been to the Pacific Northwest. So that was really, really fun.
That's some good insight into, you know, how to create your own opportunities, because that's something that's going to be really important in your path as a writer. You're definitely not always going to have opportunity come to you. So
that's right. No one's coming.
No one is coming. So
you need to go.
Go where they are.
Exactly.
You know, there's so much information, and you just mentioned, you know, going through the list of, you know, where can I get my work out? And I know, because I just went through this whole list on Poets and Writers, the website for that magazine. So you can find all of that information, and some of them don't have interviews, most of them do, but certainly, you know, you don't even have to leave your house at this point to kind of get that information. So that's the great thing about it. But over the course of this period of time where you've published, you know, these collections of poetry, and all of these books, how have you seen the publishing industry change?
The switch from paper to online is really huge. I remember actually when I was first starting out, I would subscribe to Poets and Writers, and I would go to the calls for submissions, and I would cut out the ones that I thought looked good to me, and I would tape them to a piece of paper. And then I would file sending those off. I was born on April 13th, so I would send out 13 packages at a time. So I had, you know, a half to take to the post office each time. So there was the printing, and there was the going to the post office, and the postage, and the waiting to hear back, and the self-addressed stamped envelope, and all of that. So things are much quicker now, and in some ways easier. But in some ways, the ease makes it more overwhelming. So I do think that limiting yourself to a rhythm that feels doable for you for the submissions is a really good thing to do. You can just kind of have a plan that you're going to submit 3 things a week or 4 things a month or whatever feels right to you. And keep track of it. Try not to send things out to more than one place. And also know, to a certain extent, it's a lottery. Back in the days when we were using snail mail, I remember getting a rejection of a poem from a journal. And so I filed it away, as I did. I no longer keep rejection letters, but at the time I was really struggling. And so I would keep the rejection letters again, so the biographers would know how many people were dumb to turn me down. And one day I had enough of that, and it was enough negative energy, and I just got rid of all the files. But I filed it away and boomerang the poem back out. You know, when you get something back, you just send it out again. It's just, you know, a cycle. A few months went by, and I got another letter from the editor. It turns out that there had been a fire in their offices. And as she was cleaning up, she came across my poem. And she said, I know we rejected it before, but I see it in a new way now. Can we publish it? And what that taught me, that was a real awakening for me, because I realized, you know what? It really is a lottery. You don't know what's been going through their minds. You don't know whether they've just had a fire. You don't know what is obsessing them in the current moment. And so being gentle with the editors, I think, is really important. Seeing them as people and reaching out in that way. Not like that they're a stair that you want to step on in order to get to your fame, but that they really are people who go through hard times and might see a poem one way one day and a completely different way another day. So keep trying. It might not have anything to do with you. It might just be that they haven't had their fire yet.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I always, you know, when people ask me for advice, I tell them, you know, you can't take any of this personally. And the great thing about it, as you talk about how the publishing industry has changed, is a lot of us are doing this stuff from behind our computers. You know, and so, you know, they don't know what we look like. And, you know, and I tell people all the time, because I'm always asked, oh, well, how did you get on? You know, I write for Hearst Digital Media or Hearst Digital magazines. And there's a lot of people that get into their contributor network, but they don't ever, you know, have anything published. And so, and I've had, probably just over 60% of my articles published. But I always say, you know, there are certain things where if I have the energy to give to it, you know, if I have something I feel like, okay, this is good for this publication, I'll send it in. And, you know, I send it in and it's done. And I don't know what they're looking for one day to the next. I don't see any rhyme or reason, you know, for why one story is picked over the next. And certainly, you know, and I'm the type of person, you know, I will, you know, I'll follow up. I'm not going to assume that they were waiting for my email. And, you know, and they're still thinking over it. You know, these editors have so much going on, and they have so many inquiries and so much work to do. But I was talking with my life partner last night, and just telling him a funny story about how I just sold an article to a publication that, you know, I got a really, probably the one of the rudest rejection emails from the editor last year. And I just and I almost wanted to respond back, you know, in a negative way. And then I thought, no, something must be going on with her, because I don't typically receive these type. It was just like, no, and this article isn't helpful. And I'm like, what? You know? So I stayed clear of the publication for a while, but I really had this article where I felt like, okay, this is going to fit, you know? So sent out a basic little query, sent the article, you know, same editor, she loved it, you know, and life goes on. It's like you have to assume that maybe she really just was having a bad day. And that's all, you know, there is.
We work within that larger context, too, of culture and history. My novel, Shamrock and Lotus, was with a very major press in New York and had gotten through all the kind of steps until it went to the president, who said, and this was in 2002, no one wants to read about the rest of the world since 9/11.
Okay.
And it actually took me 8 more years before that novel got published. So, as particularly as creative writers, we have a bit of the prophet in us, and we're sometimes about 10 years ahead of what the culture is ready to hear.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that we should silence ourselves, and it definitely doesn't mean that we should give up. It means that we keep going, knowing that just as it takes 10 years to create a genius, it sometimes takes a culture 10 years to be able to hear these genius ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's important to have self-care that allows you to keep going no matter what's going on around you.
Mm-hmm. I like the saying I heard, I believe it was last week. It was like, you can get fired from a job, but you can't get fired from, from your craft, from your art, so you kind of always have to have that mentality. Okay, this is not for you, whether it be an editor, whether it be a particular publication, but it's for someone,
Yeah.
So there was this video that came out, I think it was a few months ago, and I'm probably going to destroy his name, but there's an author and a writer, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who most people know for his work with The Atlantic. And he's got a really popular novel that's circulating now, but he did this video that was so, it resonated with me so deeply. And it was just about his whole mentality as a writer and how he just there's never any there's not this arrogance or this sheer confidence about the work, that every single time that he started a project, he was riddled with insecurity. And a fear of rejection, so how is your writing process? Do you feel that way? Is it something that starts off as just something that's so personal to you and you feel compelled to write it and you do it? Do you have, a certain level of confidence once you reach, you've published 13 books and you're at this status? What is it like for you?
I don't really think about sharing while I'm writing. Kind of think of it as writing for myself so that I can keep it very sacred and very truthful. The other thing when we start to think about publishing, sharing, what other people will think, is that we flip from the right creative side of the brain to the left side of the brain, which is very good at criticizing and judging and thinking in terms of right and wrong. And so when I'm involved in a project, it's just me and the project. It's intimate. And it has to be intimate so that you can trust yourself. It's like a good relationship. There has to be a sense of the words catching you and you catching the words. That there's that love there, that trust, and that intimacy. And then I say, you had posted on Facebook a few days ago, my article, Writing is Like Sex. Because I do think that, like sex, you also don't want to criticize during the act. And another nice metaphor is that it's like bread. You have to give it time to rise. I believe that we're writing for the people we're becoming. So when we criticize, edit, revise, cross out too soon, right away, we haven't grown into that wise person who will understand what that writing is really about. So I don't try to send things out for weeks, months, sometimes even years. If it's a book that's particularly personal, sometimes it'll take years before I can see it as not about me. I think about halfway, I probably published 5 or 6 books. So about halfway through my writing career, I realize that the universe accepts our work when it's no longer about us, when it really has become a work of art that is for the world and not really about our ego or identity or how we feel about ourselves. And as long as we have that clinging, that attachment to the work, it's like the universe can smell it on us, you know, like when we're desperate and we go to a bar, you can smell it on people. So when we don't, it's not that we don't care anymore. It's that we've let ourselves grow into who we're becoming. We've returned to the work from that perspective of wisdom, and we've reworked it and then worked with other people, editors, agents, publishers, to make it be what the world needs it to be. And then it's no longer about us. This is a particular backpack that writers carry that readers often think that what we write is about us. And even when it's incredibly personal, it really isn't. You know, we don't go to a museum and ask the paintings what was going on in the writer's, in the artist's life at that time. The art we see with visual art, with dance, with music even, to a certain extent, we're able to see those things as art that rises above the individual story. And it's harder with writing because they are stories. But in the end, they're not really about us. You know, when we read really great works of literature, we honor the author, but the book is much more personal to us than that. Doesn't matter who she or he was and what their life was. At a certain point, the book becomes our friend, and the book is bigger than who that person was.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I love that, just that whole statement, you know, we're writing for the people that we are becoming. And I mean, I will go back sometimes and look at my writing and go, wow, that, like, you know, all that wisdom, you know.
Yes, we don't.
And I don't know if that,
how much we know. That's right. That's exactly why, you know, keeping a journal is so very important, and being able to trust yourself and tell the truth to yourself, because those, just simply writing it changes you. And then you can return later and realize the wisdom that you had, that writing was preparing you for what was going to happen down the road.
Yeah, sometimes you'll find that I know for me, I'm so far removed. You know, I wrote an article this past month or last month for a series for Good Housekeeping that came out, and it's about domestic violence and abuse. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, you know, I said, you know, it's so funny because, you know, I kind of stopped writing about this topic for a while because it's like, that's not my life anymore. And I realized, you know, and it almost felt heavy, like, you know, I had been doing it for a while, when really the last time I actually had an article published about that was in 2014. And so I'm going, it's actually been a while. But as you go through, and like you said, you're in different seasons, you're in different stages of your life, you just see that, okay, I wrote it, I put it out there. And that's why, you know, we talk about how writing is so healing. You know, you have kind of moved through all of that, you know, and you're removed from it in a certain way. So in that way, yeah, it does become, you know, for the readers.
Yes, that's right. And, you know, I want to just remind ourselves, and in saying this, I'm reminding myself as well, we're very courageous. The root of the word courageous comes from the French cœur, which means heart. And writers live through our hearts, and we're very courageous to put that heart down on the page. which is why I think of self-care as a form of radical justice. Because if we're the ones saying what society needs to hear, and we're having the courage to do that, then we deserve to take very, very tender, loving care with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And not push ourselves too much.
When you speak about just having courage, and I know you probably get the same feedback too when people read your writing, because that word gets thrown around a lot. And I'm thinking, and my writing is my baby in that moment. And once I have it, it's done. Sometimes I'll have to go back, oh, did I write that? So, but they're so connected to it. They go, oh gosh, you're so brave to have written that. And then we have, this lovely world that we live in now where you get, depending on where you're published, which the majority of mine is digital publication. So you get that immediate response, whether it's positive or negative. So talk about how you have dealt, having published books and manuscripts that are out in the world, how you deal with, with some of the negative and the positive feedback.
Mm-hmm. One of the themes that I write about a lot is mothering. And I learned how to mother by being a stepmother. Because with my stepdaughter, Laura, I realized that she wasn't mine. And that I had to rise up above my raisin. Mm-hmm. And maybe treat her differently than I would have if she had been my biological kid. And what she taught me is that all children leave. And this was something that my mom friends didn't know because their kids were younger and she was older. Mm-hmm. And this was a good lesson as a writer, too. All writings leave. And if we've really done the work of healing whatever wounds brought us to the writing in the beginning, letting it rise like bread, returning to it later, working it so that it's a piece of art and not really about our identity, then we can let it go into the world like a child who leaves and not chase after it, doing its laundry, baking its cookies, it has to learn to do that on its own. So when I get criticism, it's criticism for the work, but it's not really about me. Mm-hmm. Because unless a person has walked into my home and had dinner with my family, they don't really know me. Right. So how can they be criticizing me based on what I've written? Mm-hmm. And praise is equally as unimportant. Mm-hmm. I go back to that fire story. Yeah. She loved the poem after the fire. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Subjective. It's all subjective.
People have fires in their lives and your work speaks to them and they suddenly love you. Mm-hmm. But they don't really love you. They love your writing. It's not you.
Right. Good point. Now you are also something that gets talked about a lot. You write for the Huffington Post. And so I know, and there's a lot of articles out there, what's the purpose? Most people know, unless you're a staff writer, you don't get paid. But there's still an element of prestige to be in that community and to be able to blog for them. So tell us a little bit about your experience, why you decided to do it, if it's really able to help you connect with readers.
I think it helped me connect with readers in kind of a quantitative way. I think that their numbers, their reach, their kind of social media shareability is really high. it's completely different animal than something like Literary Mama, where, you know, you really feel like the readers who comment on a column or on a piece have really kind of taken it into their hearts. Huffington Post has more of the troll population. And so, you know, you take the good with the bad, you take the numbers with the trolls. One thing that I will say that has been really refreshing about blogging for them is that they don't really have many stipulations on what they don't want you to talk about. And they have so many different kinds of pages, you know, gay voices, women's voices, GPS for the soul, politics, education, that for me, who can write about a lot of different things, it's been really freeing to know that I have a place where I can go to blog and have it fit into lots of different categories depending on what I want to write about.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, because I know there's so many people that remain curious about it, about becoming a HuffPost blogger. And how did you get involved with it? Was it something where you just pitched them, or were they familiar with your work?
I reached out to a writer friend of mine. I had read her book and then saw that she published at HuffPost. And so I just wrote to her and said, would you be willing to let me kind of have an introduction with your editor? And she said, sure. So it was just a matter of asking and getting a yes.
So pay attention if that's something that you're...
When they reached out to me and said, you know, I'd love to have this on HuffPost. Do you think they would like it? Do you know an editor who I could contact? So, but I also had a good friend who writes on domestic violence issues. And she submitted hers directly to Ariana and got a email back. So don't be afraid to go to the top either, because that can work out.
There's so many different ways. So I just kind of wanted to be able to share with the viewers how you did it. I know that every once in a while you'll see on their different Facebook pages, because I've had my articles in HuffPost Divorce. So every once in a while, there'll be little blurbs from editors. Hey, we're looking for more bloggers. So I happen to have inquired once, but, you know, they were inquiring about writing about divorce, and that wasn't where I was at the moment. So, so I kind of passed on that. But like you said, there are so many different areas of it. If you want to write about issues for women who are over 55 and just different things, that's what I love about it, because I'm also a reader. So
yeah,
so that's interesting. Now tell us about the Feminar.
The Feminar is a 7-week program for women. It meets live with women from around the world. And it's a combination of mindfulness and feminist theory to inspire women to create, activate, and intergenerate. So what that means is many of the women who take the Feminar are writers or academics or artists, do something creative in their lives and want that to go even deeper. The activate part of it is to think of activism in a new way. How can activism be something that is not just, you know, signing a petition or voting, or putting a bumper sticker on the back of your car? All of those things are great. But how can activism be something that allows you to get to know people in your community and around the world? And really kind of in the same way that I was talking about making connections in the writing world, making connections with other women to create a vision of justice and equality. And the intergenerate part of the class is really cool because we encourage women of different generations to share their experiences. I think it's been really interesting in this election how much fire and steam has happened around the Hillary question. And I see that as an issue where the younger generation of feminists is really, really different from the older generation. And not in a good or bad way, just all the feminisms all the time. But there's a difference between the liberal feminists of the 60s and 70s, for whom equality was kind of the main thing that they looked at, and women in their 20s who think about difference rather than equality, who are much more comfortable with diversity in terms of sexuality and race and gender identity. And so the overarching ideal of equality in the older feminists doesn't always compute for the younger generation, because often equality can feel like sameness and conformity, and also having to adhere to certain mainstream principles of race, class, and gender. So the Feminar kind of blows all that up, and we intergenerate and bring people together using their differences, as Audre Lorde said.
That's awesome. It's so interesting because I'm doing a show on Thursday about with a writer, and she's going to be talking about an essay that she published for Harriet.com. And she's going to break down, like, you know, what does Black feminism mean? What is womanism? And I find that there are so many labels. You know, I'm kind of lost by it all at this point. You know, even if you want to identify as a feminist at this point, what does it mean? You know,
one of my mentors when I was at Emory was Beverly Sheftal. She's the founder of the Women's and Gender Studies Center at Spelman College.
Oh, wow.
And what I learned from her is that the first feminists in America were African-American women. They had a vision of feminism when, you know, white women can barely even imagine what it means to think about freedom under slavery. And so I think particularly for American women to understand the history and the writings of African-American feminists is essential, because they were the first feminists and came up with a lot of the concepts that later white and European feminists, a room of one's own, or, you know, kind of motherhood as a way of making a difference for the next generation. African-American feminists wrote about it first. So it's not really, it shouldn't be, you know, the last thing on the syllabus. It really should be the first thing on the syllabus.
Well, I look forward to starting that opening up that conversation. Hopefully you can tune in and maybe you can pop in and shed some light on that, because that's going to be an interesting discussion. But what are you working on next?
I have a memoir that I'm shopping around. It's called Mother Philosopher. And it is the history of my relationship with my mother told through the history of philosophy. The meaty story underneath that is that when I came out to my mom at the age of 45, she told me that it was the best day of her life. And this was in the context of having been married to a man. Well, I told her that. So our relationship has been funny and intense and loaded with philosophy because she's a philosophy professor.
Oh, wow.
And so I wanted to ask what it meant to grow up with a philosopher mother.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what does it mean to philosophize with a woman's body? And so that's really the theme of mothering and stepmothering, and what it means to have both a body and a mind in our culture are really the questions that it answers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will stay tuned for that. I love any type of memoir that covers mother-daughter relationships. Baby Love by Rebecca Walker is one of my favorite books because it sheds so much light on, even if you don't think it pertains to you, you start to see, oh, these are the patterns. I recognize this in my relationship with my mother. So it's always fun to read those.
Yeah.
So good luck with that.
The last part of the book is actually, it goes through the ancients and the medievalists, existentialists, feminists, and the last section of the book I call stepism. Mm-hmm. Because of what my own stepdaughter taught me, what I learned from having a stepfather, and what I see my daughter and my wife going through now as they negotiate that step relationship. And there's so much richness in there. Mm-hmm. It kind of gets a bad rap, but I think step parenting and step daughtering are really ways that we grow beyond our biological, roll of the dice, and are really able to become deeper, wiser people.
Yeah, so that's interesting that it's also going to explore the relationships in blended families. That's a really, I think, kind of a hot topic as well right now, a really relevant topic, because there are so many people with blended families. So that sounds like it's going to be a great read. Now, if somebody wants to learn more about your writing course, and first of all, explain to them before you explain where they can find you. Tell them why they would want a writing coach, because coaching in itself is so popular right now. So what could they gain from working with a writing coach?
Well, one of the things that I do that's very different from other coaches is that during our sessions, we actually write together. So I teach new techniques to write faster and easier with more joy, more flow. And the way that I teach it is to do it with you. We don't just talk. In fact, in a lot of sessions, there's hardly any talking at all. Mm-hmm. And you're not on your own trying to practice things. We practice things during the sessions that you can then begin to practice on your own. If people are interested, they can go to my website, which is just my name, CassiePremoSteele.com. and learn more about the individual coaching there and also the seminar. And I'll be giving a free workshop in 2 weeks on the 23rd of March. And there's information about that on the website as well under the invitation link. And so when people come to the workshop, they have an opportunity to have a free one-on-one coaching session with me as well. So that's a way to kind of get to know me and see what it's like to work with me.
Awesome. Well, you can also find out more information. I'll put all your links up on my website as well, which you can find at myloveth4writing.com. And it's been lovely to speak with you. I'm so glad we got a chance to do this because, we interact here and there online, but it's so fun getting to know, the story behind your writing and learn more about your writing journey. So thank you so much. This has been
great, Shanon. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I'm so glad that we have this connection.
Yeah, I'm grateful as well. Well, Thank you so much for joining us for the first official episode of WORDPLAY. You can catch the replay on Blab. This will also be available on YouTube. And if you have any questions, again, you can find Cassie at Cassie Premo Steele. She is on Twitter at Premo Steele, so you can write to her there. You can always tweet me at My Love for Writing. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.